individually and both collectively, we have to come to a sort of restorative justice, whereby we can heal as individuals and we can heal as a community and then as a nation.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another Bright News discussion. My name is Shannon Braswell, and I'm joined today by His Imperial Highness, Prince Ermias Sahle-Selassie of the House of Ethiopia, House of Solomon. He is the great-grandson of the late Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia and the grandson of Her Highness Empress Menen Asfa. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the history, the culture, and the faith of Ethiopia. So without further ado, Prince Ermias Sahle-Selassie, how are you?
I'm well, Shannon. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to talk with you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me. So, because we're actually within the time right now of Lent, or what I believe in Ethiopia they call it Tzom. I thought it might be good to start off with talking about the religion and faith within Ethiopia. So yeah. I mean, if you want to start, yeah.
Well, Ethiopia is a very ancient land, and we are the first state as a state to accept Christianity, the Orthodox faith. We were also had a Judeo-Christian culture before that. And we were also first as a nation to welcome Muhammad followers when they faced persecution in Arabia. So Ethiopia has been really a melting pot of religions, of tolerance, of faith, and it's unique in that way. It's very much unique in that way.
Right. And we know that Ethiopia, especially for Christianity, right? It has this long-standing tradition that I think a lot of people in the West may not really be aware of, say, in terms of how Christianity evolved in say, Africa or the Middle East, right? I'm just thinking here in terms of, say, the liturgy and things of that nature, the language, the sacred language. Could you talk a little bit about that and maybe some of the nuances there?
Absolutely. A lot of people have always believed that Christianity was always imported into Ethiopia, or civilization came to Ethiopia from outside. But Ethiopia developed its own language, its own culture, independent of everywhere else, and its own calendar. So we have a very unique country in that sense, and it's also been a very interesting fusion of many cultures, because Ethiopia has expanded and contracted over centuries. So it's been a fusion of cultures, faith, and people living together. And also we were able to develop this because we were a fortified country, because we're a very mountainous country. So we lived in isolation for a very long time.
Okay.
But nonetheless, we also were not victims of colonialism. So we were able to preserve that culture, up to this time.
Right. And I do want to get into that a little bit later, because I would like to talk about the Battle of Ottawa, which is celebrated this month. So yes. But I wanted to go back to one of the speeches you had given about the title of the Conquering Lion of Judah, right?
Yes.
And I thought that was a really interesting topic, because you were talking about the symbolism and the meaning behind the model, right? That comes before, say it's the you know the what is it? The Lion of Judah has conquered.
Yes.
Right? Is this
Yeah.
is this the beginning of the Solomonic motto, or is this?
Absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
that basically is the symbology behind it.
Right.
It's out of Revelation
Okay.
in the Bible,
Right.
and Ethiopians always believed of the coming of Christ.
Right.
So when in Revelation it talked about the conquering of Lion of Judah, it was talking about Christ.
Right.
So Ethiopian leaders or kings or emperors always saw themselves as adhering to that prophecy, and that they were guardians and safekeepers until that time, and servants of Christ.
Okay.
So that's the title, Conquering Lion of the Tribe of Judah,
Right.
which many people misunderstand.
Yeah, that's what I was I was gonna say. It sounds like as though, a lot of times when people when they hear that motto, they think in terms of, oh, well the king of Ethiopia who's coming right now is going to, you know, uh conquer. But what I hear you saying is that it's actually what do you call it? Marking or demarcating the significance of Christ being the
Right.
victor over sin and death, right?
Yes.
Am I correct in
Absolutely.
saying that? Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. I got one right. I got one point.
No. You're
Okay.
doing well.
Great. Um,
Now, mind
so
you,
yes.
it could be how that kind of interpretation which you mentioned for the Rastafarian thing,
Okay. Right.
which is a whole other thing. But
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a fusion in all that.
Right. Yes. So now in terms of the national epic of Ethiopia, we're talking about the Kebra Nagast. Now, for a lot of people, they've heard the name Queen of Sheba, floated around a number of times. I'm sure they've heard of King Solomon, King David, and things like that. But what is the significance of the Kebra Nagast and King Solomon, and say the Queen of Sheba to Ethiopia?
It's very much part of our general makeup and very much part of our heritage, because the Kebra Nagast, along with the Futa Nagast, which is the Book of Laws,
Okay.
depicts in its storytelling about the visit of the Queen of Sheba to seek wisdom, firstly, and to the court of Solomon, and how she was able to come back with an heir to the Aksumite Empire named Menelik, and that subsequently Menelik would venture back to see Solomon and bring back the Ark of the Covenant back to Ethiopia.
Yes. Okay. And how should I say this? How knowledgeable are say younger people within the African diaspora about this, say Ethiopian Americans? Do they know that's the story, or are they aware of that? Or?
No, unfortunately, no, but it's very much part of their heritage. So
Right.
It's so sad that it's been hidden away. And, for us, the beauty of Ethiopia is that we have always depicted our faith also in terms of our own color, in terms of people who looked like us and our saints and so forth. So it's very unfortunate that the African diaspora worldwide is not so as aware of that as we are. But hopefully a new generation now, with the accessibility of knowledge and communication, will start to learn and research it more, take interest.
Right. And since you mentioned that, the idea of artwork as being sort of very impactful for people's understanding of scripture and stuff, right? I know that Ethiopia carries a lot. There's a lot of images as far as the Christian church. And I was just wondering what you thought about the return of some of the sacred objects and some of the national objects that were taken from Ethiopia, say during the I'm thinking of the Italian invasion in the 1930s.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Magdala.
That and Magdala going back to Tedros's time.
Mhm.
Well, there are good signs that they're war loots basically, and by any possible means, they should be returned to their rightful owner.
Right.
But there's been an argument as to where do you start and where do you stop. But conversation is progressing, which is encouraging. That's the most important. I think when you have a conversation, you'll come to a solution. So it is my hope that those things will be returned to us because they rightfully belong to us.
Yes. Yeah, that was a very, I kind of kept up with some of the monuments and things being returned to Ethiopia, like the Aksumite obelisk,
Yes.
stele, right?
Yes.
And the crown that was taken during the siege of Magdala. So that one I think just got recently returned not too long ago, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. It was in the middle of a square in Rome.
Right.
So it's very odd.
Yeah.
But it's a big sign. It's an encouragement. I mean, we have still many religious manuscripts all over the world, religious artifacts. So we hope one day we come to our senses and put things where they belong.
Right. Yeah. Now I want to talk about this because this is sort of, I think, maybe what put Ethiopia on the world stage back in the 1890s, and that's the Battle of Adwa.
Yes.
So I know a lot of people probably have heard that word, heard that term, stuff like that in history classes, or just kind of vaguely, right? And I remember when I was in high school, I had heard about it, but it was only in context to how it related to the other wars that were going on at the time. Right. So a lot of people will argue for the invasion of, say, Poland or something like that to basically explain the Second World War. And I've always been kind of like, well, what about what happened in Ethiopia in the 1935, right? We don't include that, and I for what reason I don't know, but can you give people who don't know about that maybe a little bit of background about what was going on at the time?
Well, when the European powers sat at the Berlin Conference and decided to divide Africa into their own territories, the one that broke the model for that was Ethiopian, because Italians, being newcomers to colonies, decided to invade from Eritrea down into Ethiopia. And Ethiopians put all their differences aside and fought this great battle and won. Yes. So that broke the model of European dominance. Yes. So that gave a lot of encouragement to other countries that had faced oppression, that had faced, because it's very similar to also Haiti, that it is possible to confront and to win an unjust war. So that's the legacy. Yes. Mind you, 1936 was also a direct consequence of that. So they came back to avenge their defeat. Yeah. And again, another tragedy occurred.
Right. And this is, I had learned about what they call it, the Treaty of Wuchale.
Yes.
And how the Italians, I might have gotten the battles mixed up, right? Because you're thinking about the Italians, they come back a second time to try to invade. But we'll talk now about the first battle, the Battle of Adwa. with the Treaty of Wuchale, that the Italians had actually written up a different treaty than the one that was agreed upon with King Menelik.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. They tried to deceive him.
Right. Right. And that, yeah, and that, you know, I mean, of course it backfired, right? But you know, another interesting thing that I had learned, and maybe you can talk more about this, was that the British and the French were actually looking to try and control the whole of East Africa, and they were battling with each other, right? And they had used, I want to say, the Italians as a the British had used the Italians as a what do you want to call it? A
testing ground.
Partner, yeah, testing ground. A testing ground, you know, to see if they could actually, it's like, okay, yeah, take it so that we can, you know. And I think, you know, just, I mean, the message that battle sent, I think, throughout the Western world and throughout, you know, America and everything. I mean, it really cemented the idea that, you know, everyone is not gonna just sit back and let you, you know, take apart their country, you know, or take apart their land, right? And it shows that unity that you were talking about, that Ethiopia really did a good job at, you know.
It did, and it taught us a big lesson.
Yeah.
Because when we during World War II, during the League of Nations, you remember the Emperor's great speech, probably one of the greatest speeches in the 20th century, one of them, in which he felt very much alone, sort of forlorn by and abandoned by the international community. I mean, it's very interesting how history repeats itself. What we're watching in Ukraine today is like going back to 36.
Right.
And it led absolutely directly with the creation of the African Union, or the Organization of African Unity, because Ethiopia knew that it had to have allies, that it couldn't depend on the West or anywhere else to find the voice. And by creating unity, it has now at least a block of voice that is directly in its interest.
Right.
So,
yeah. Now during the time that in the 1930s, with the second invasion by the Italians, I believe His Majesty spent some time in England, right, in Bath.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how was that experience for him there? I mean,
it was a very, very difficult time, because the government of the day didn't support him, and they were sort of trying to basically ignore him.
Okay.
But it was incredible. There was a mass of people of goodwill who were anti-fascist, like they were all over Europe. I mean, it's so sad. Sometimes the politicians and the people, you know, are taken as one, but it wasn't the case. So he had a lot of good support from the community in Bath, and generally throughout the UK and also throughout Europe. So, and also in the Americas, especially by the African American community.
Yes, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was a difficult time for him, because he didn't know if he'll be in exile in perpetuity. It must have been heartbreaking to watch his country go down the drain, and to see all the slaughter and massacre, including chemical weapons being used against his people. It must have been a very, very difficult time.
Yes. And there were some soldiers that had stayed within the capital, right? That were fighting. What did they call them? The black lions.
The black lions, absolutely.
Yes, okay.
The patriots. Right. You know, Ethiopians never believed that they were fully colonized at all. They were 5 years of occupation based on guerrilla fighting by the patriots.
Yes.
So they never gave the Italians an easy time.
Right.
And they were eventually able to win. So
Yes.
His Majesty had to also keep communication with them and give leadership and be a rallying ground, a sense of hope that Ethiopia will be liberated again. And he was very happy when it happened exactly 5 years to the day.
Yes.
When he left the capital.
Yeah. And I'm sure his faith had to be very, very strong then, because
extremely.
Extremely.
If there was anything that could make you give up, that would have been it. It's like walking up a hill with people shooting down at you.
Yeah. Such a, I mean, you think about the men in those days. I mean, how they had to have so much patience and willpower.
Absolutely,
it's amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but
and
now,
being right in the midst of your adversaries. That's also very difficult.
Yeah, that's another one, right?
It's very, very difficult.
Right. It's like, how do you keep your composure and stuff? I mean, young people these days, we would not be able to deal with any of that.
I understand. We're a very impatient generation today.
That's right. That's right. But I pray that I can at least get half of that. We come to half of that. Yeah. But so now, I since we're talking about the faith of His Majesty, I had listened to one of his talks on what they call the Lutheran Hour. I think he did this, in like the 1960s, right?
About Christmas, I think.
No. Yeah, Christmas, right? Yeah,
Christmas,
right. And one of the things that stood out for me was that His Majesty didn't just talk about the divinity of Christ, but he also talked about the humanity, right? That Christ is an exemplary figure, right? Someone that we should all aspire to be like on this earth, right?
Yes.
As well as, trying to reach that point of, I'm not going to say divinity, but, of trying to reach the point of perfection, right? And, I really like the fact that he pointed out that, if we all do our due diligence to try and reach, to be exemplary Christians, exemplary human beings, that we would see the world, change for the better. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, the life of Christ is very exemplary in the sense of how many tests he overcame as a human, how his faith, his prayer, his vision, and his sacrifice showed and led by example.
Yes.
It wasn't preaching. It was, if you take his entire life, it was an exemplary life. And how much he sacrificed for us.
Yes.
So that we may inherit the life hereafter. So it's really a meditation, something all Christians or any people of faith can take a great, lesson from.
Yes. And in the Ethiopian church, do you fast for is it 40 days or 50?
Sometimes longer, wow. Depending on the calendar.
Okay.
I think it's longer than 40 days this year.
Right.
Yeah. But it's very much part of remembering, what Christ went through for us. Right. And then celebrating it in Easter when he arises again. So, it's like there will always be time of testing and times of darkness, and then there'll be times of light.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And that's a good message for this day and time, since we're
it's been an incredible couple of years of Corona, and now the threat of, a nuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
People have been isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And then the tragedy occurring in Ethiopia today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's been really a very testing time, to say the least.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this Lent has been good for all of us.
Absolutely. A lot of Ethiopians are praying for peace.
Yes.
And I think people worldwide are doing also for world peace,
Yes, indeed.
because we live certainly in very uncertain times, unpredictable.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I I wanted to talk about His Majesty's because I think this is really cool. I don't know how other people feel about this, but I think this is really cool. That when he moved up, in political power, he brought in a lot of non-aristocratic young people into places, within the offices of power, and had them educated. And I think that is such a I've never heard anything like that before, where he was basically, taking these, he was leading by example. I mean, almost to me,
Well, I don't know if you'd call it bribe or incentive, but sometimes you have to even pay the parents to send their children to school. So,
right, please, just yeah, that's
so,
yeah.
That was also one of his greatest legacies, like to
Right.
have an educated class without, taking into account their background, where they came from, because he did believe in merit and that the future of Ethiopia lay in its young people, like it always does, and that the only way for the country to develop is to have an educated class.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's
because colonialism never educated Africa.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
That's why we find ourselves where we find ourselves today. Ethiopians don't understand the fruits of having been independent and having been able to chart their course, and how many others sacrificed so much through colonialism.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, yes, that's true. I mean, you think about all the lives that were lost and all the dreams that were, broken in that time.
Sure.
And how so many people, fought for those freedoms. And Ethiopia, to me, was the beacon, of light there.
Absolutely.
Especially in those times, because I mean, so many people, they, like I said, even with black people, with the African diaspora, we'd never seen, a king from Africa on any magazines. And I'm a couple of generations forward, so I mean, we don't, nobody in my generation really knows much about, that time period. But we've all seen photos and pictures of His Majesty on magazines, and we knew that, that was the face of prominence. He had the image of someone who demanded respect. That was new for us. Yeah.
I think he very much was aware and understood his role, because unfortunately the story of Africans generally throughout the transatlantic slave trade, to be followed by colonialism, was a brutal one. So to have the dignity that Africans have, their own culture, their own way, their own governance, their own people, and independence, he was very much aware of that role. And he tried to portray that dignity, that it's not often like what they say it is, that there is also another version.
Yes, that's great. Your Highness, I want to ask you now about, Empress Munin Aswell.
Yes.
So she's a very interesting figure within that time. I know that in Ethiopia, a lot of the wives or the consorts of the emperor were very involved in the political affairs of Ethiopia. You have Empress Taitu with His Majesty Emperor Menelik, and you have, others who have been involved, but Empress Menen was not as involved in politics, but I did notice that she was very much involved in the social well-being and the educational well-being of her people, right? She
right.
So yeah.
Well, I mean, naturally, behind most great men are great women.
Yes.
And really, that's where the foundation starts. And I think Empress Menen, her story has not been told.
Yes.
But it's one of great sacrifice, and one also where she was really the foundation for the emperor. And she was a woman of faith who was very actively involved in social affairs, especially concerning women and education. She was able to create the first girls' school and create, orphanages, and very well known for building churches throughout, not just in Ethiopia, also in Israel. So she was definitely a person also who led by example.
Yes, I noticed she had a lot of piety. She I believe I read somewhere that she had given up her original coronation crown.
Absolutely.
To or maybe you could say, I don't
the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem, which I was fortunate to visit, but I wasn't able to see the crown itself.
Okay.
About a few years back, because she said to God, if you're going to return us back to our country, I will sacrifice this as a sign of, that you've answered my prayer.
Yes.
So,
and that prayer was answered.
It was answered. It was answered.
Yeah, I still think, and I think someone else said this, that like a book was written about her. It's a not that big, but there was a book written about. But I think someone should do a real piecemeal book on her.
I agree. It's very important.
Yes, I think so. So okay, now we can discuss sort of, I don't want to make it sad, but I would like to talk about what happened as far as faith-based, religiously in Ethiopia once the Derg took over. Was it similar to what maybe one would find in Russia or something like that in the during their revolution?
Yes, very much so. I think faith was very much persecuted as a result of communism having taken hold of in Ethiopia. All churches were closed. A lot of the religious leaders were imprisoned. There was no open worship. People always worshipped, clandestinely. And it really did, 17 years of that really did break the foundations of just not faith, but of social interaction, of community living. And Ethiopia has witnessed that kind of violence, which was very unusual. I mean, and unfortunately, violence against our own people. I mean, at least when it was during the Italian War, it was, fighting foreign invasion. But this was for power. And I don't think we've healed from that period yet. We haven't healed because we haven't gotten justice for that period or been able to think it through and learn from it, because we find ourselves precisely in the same situation today.
It's it's sort of you think it's one of those things that family members or people within the Ethiopian diaspora kind of like to, they don't want to have that conversation about that, or is it more just?
I think also it's a very hard thing to confront. It's easier to deny than confront, because individually and both collectively, we have to come to a sort of restorative justice, whereby we can heal as individuals and we can heal as a community and then as a nation.
Right.
And it's been easier to ignore it, to bypass it. But it won't allow us to move forward, because we have to forgive. We have to be able to analyze, learn from what happened, and not fall in to repeat the same thing, which is precisely what's going on. And bring those accountable to justice. I don't think, that period has really also brought people to accountability. Some, but to a large degree, not.
And do you think that because of that period and what happened, there's been sort of the disconnect of understanding history and Ethiopia's history, which it's a longer history than just what happened in the 1970s, right? I mean, if you look at Ethiopia's been a kingdom for most of its existence, right? So do you think that a lot of young people, because of that, sort of don't really have a clear picture of Ethiopia's history? Or
it's absolutely true, because what the communism does is to say there's no history exists outside of them. And you were not allowed to learn history or to even contemplate it. And then subsequent to that, the same thing happened under the following government, where even the history department within the Ethiopian universities were abolished. So how do you raise a generation that understands its past to understand today, so that they can chart tomorrow? There isn't. So yes, very much. I think that Ethiopians had been denied to know that history, and it was done purposefully. And it's my hope that in time people will learn to investigate things on their own. And I think the younger generation, I have a lot of hope in the younger generation, because they have suffered the consequences of that. They've been the ones who have been, made refugees, scattered around the world. So to find your identity, you have to also journey to find your history.
Right. Yes. Well, the one good thing I say is that, wherever, we have a pretty large Ethiopian American community here. And I say that wherever you find Ethiopians, you're destined to find a church, somewhere right there in the middle, because that's the I think the, what do you call it, the nucleus, or
it is of life. Of life. And we've been able also to share our culture with our restaurants, with our food, introducing our cuisine, so but definitely the church is the center of the community.
Right. Well, speaking about churches, I wanted to just quickly ask you if you could talk about the legacy of His Holiness Abun Makarios. I know that he had just recently passed earlier this month.
Yes.
So,
I had a great privilege of knowing him very briefly, not well, but what a difficult position to find yourself in, because he came to the forefront during the communist era. And when the new government came, they associated him with the past. So he then had to go into exile, where he lived most of his last years. In a sense, he established the churches in the diaspora, but it must have been very difficult for him also, to leave his homeland. And I heard, his greatest prayer was answered when he went back home,
Right. Yeah.
where he was honorably buried. But he
Yes.
didn't speak about his experiences for quite some time. I think like
Right.
for the past 8 years or so, he didn't
Yes.
even speak. So
Yes.
it was not an amazing personality. He
Yes.
just prayed.
Right. That's the I think here in America we call that generation the silent generation.
Absolutely.
They don't, they never, it's just like with His Majesty, they never really complained about anything, even their own, sufferings and things like that. They always kept a sort of, it's amazing to me. I just, that whole time period. So yeah.
Incredible attitude and faith.
Yes.
Incredible. Yes. Just letting go to God. Let Him.
That's right.
Do the Let Him do the work.
That's right. Yes. Well, Your Highness, I want to ask if there's anything that the Crown Council is doing right now or in the future that listeners can pay attention to and look out for. I know you guys have an Instagram page. Is that correct?
Yes.
A Twitter page?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we want to be very active in bringing back our history back and having a balanced perspective on our history,
yes,
our culture, and also to bring awareness about where we're heading, both to inspire, both to give hope to people, because we in Ethiopia find ourselves at a major crossroads today.
Yes.
And the level of violence we've witnessed, intolerance, now hunger, it's concern to everyone. It's a concern to every Ethiopian. And
yes,
we believe that all Ethiopians have a role to play. No one institution is going to solve it, and no one party is certainly not going to do it. And we have to come together as a people,
yes,
and be able to find solutions to our problems. So
yes,
we also are at the forefront of discussions and how to bring about peace, interfaith, how to build understanding between different faith groups, and also to bring back the prominence of Ethiopia to its rightful place, because I think there's been a very distorted imagery of what Ethiopia is.
yes,
internationally too.
Okay. And is there any way that people can get involved in these projects?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things we're very focused on is in education and trying to get build libraries throughout the rural areas, clean water, community centers. So, of course, these are very, very important things, and that was before the war. Now, the war today that's happened in Ethiopia has devastated, not just people, which is very important, but infrastructure, hospitals, schools, which all have to be rebuilt. So
yes,
it's also, the task is enormous, but I think the diaspora has been very exceptional in their, in their generosity and in their calling and making people aware of what's going on. And I hope they keep it up, and that we will have a role to rebuild Ethiopia.
Yes, yes. Well, I'll
and
certainly
with the help of our wider community of people of goodwill, people who care.
Yes. Yes.
It makes a big difference.
Yeah, yeah. When you have everybody involved, and
it does.
And bringing more awareness. Yeah, that's true. That's
does.
true. Well, Your Highness, I don't want to hold you up. I know that you are very, very busy. So
thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
You've been very kind. I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope it'll be the start of many more to come.
Yes, yes. Well, with that, I'm going to say, I'm a seganalo.
She's Gavirstali. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.